And this is what I didn't check previously after we finished the replacement of the valve cover, and this diaphragm valve here is what we were kind of attacking. But you'll notice when you pull this out, this has a ton of vacuum on it. So I guess because the check valve in the intake manifold is not sealing, it's essentially putting the crankcase into pretty much like an extreme vacuum. So this was kind of our visual problem, but we didn't do enough research into the root cause of why this failed. And this failed because the PCV, the check valve, and the intake manifold had failed. So it kind of was a little bit of a compounding problem. So because that check and the intake manifold failed, pulled the intake or the crankcase into a vacuum, the valve cover is tied into the crankcase, so it blew the diaphragm out in there. So I didn't go far enough back into the problem to kind of figure that out. I'm not really too familiar with these Ecotech motors, so this was something new that I had learned. And this wasn't even something that was brought up by the dealership, because I bought the valve cover from the dealership. I spoke with one of the mechanics who happened to be in the parts department area, and he was like, oh no, there isn't a PCV valve in that motor, it's just you got to replace the valve cover. So not even they were aware, and this is somebody that probably works on these pretty frequently, so they're just having you come in, swap the valve cover, and then boom, out the door you go. And then now, because I fixed that diaphragm valve and the valve cover, and we got a good seal in our system, and because the PCV valve again is bad in the intake manifold, now the crankcase is in a vacuum. So now we caused another problem, which is this oil leak we have now. If you could see down in here, there's all kinds of oil down the accessory drive side of the engine. So more than likely, because the crankcase was running under a vacuum for the last couple weeks since I fixed this, we probably sucked in the oil seal on the crank snout behind the harmonic balancer and probably caused that oil seal to fail. So now that oil is slinging around basically the belt system. That's why we have all this oil here. We also have oil over here, so I don't know if we also damaged the valve cover gasket because of that extreme vacuum that was being pulled on the intake or the crankcase side of the engine. I'm going to let the engine cool down now. I'm going to put the little blower on it, and then we're going to basically remove the intake manifold, and we're going to swap it out with a Dorman. I don't know if I'm pronouncing the manufacturer right, but essentially you could get it from AutoZone. They have a couple other vendors, but the Dorman manifold, obviously it's not OEM, it's not from Chevy, but apparently they came up with some type of fix to prevent that check valve from prematurely failing. So it seems from the research I've done online that it's better to go with this intake manifold than to do the OEM one from Chevy, because more than likely this one's just going to fail again. You're going to keep repeating to do this same job over and over again. So hopefully this one will fix the venting issue with the crankcase, and then that will prevent the check valve from failing, or the diaphragm valve from failing in the valve cover, and they'll also prevent the vacuum on the crankcase from sucking the seals in and causing all types of oil leaks. I'm really hoping we didn't damage the rear main seal, because then we'd have to pull the transmission off to change that. That'd be a lot bigger job than doing the one on the harmonic balancer side. So hopefully that's not going to be too bad of an issue. More than likely what I'll do today is we'll just replace the intake manifold and get that swapped out, and then I'll clean all this stuff up here with engine degreaser, like a brake cleaner, get all this dried out, and then we'll get it up on the lift maybe next week and do a better thorough investigation of where all this oil is coming from, because with it slinging around the belt and everything like that, I don't know if it was coming out of the valve cover dripping down. I don't know if it's coming from the main crank seal behind the harmonic balancer. So before I'm tearing stuff apart and replacing parts, I'd rather do a little more of an investigation into where the oil is coming from, and the best way to do that is clean the area up really good, do a little bit of test driving with it, and then recheck for leaks, and hopefully you can narrow down, pinpoint better where that leak is coming from. Alright, we got everything shifted over onto the new manifold. So the time lapse, it just kind of was me disassembling everything. There's a lot of little clips and stuff that you got to be mindful of, especially underneath. There was like a harness that was coming off the starter, and there's a small line here that's tied in with that PCV assembly hose. This one here just has one of those little spring clips. Be careful with that, because that nipple is very it's very small and brittle, the vacuum lines on the back. And this one's for the purge connection. And I also cleaned up the throttle body while I was in there. I had some throttle body cleaner in my cabinet, so cleaned that out. Where the intake ports were pretty foul with some oil, probably because of the way this thing's just been sucking oil into the intake with that check valve being bad. So I'll probably end up running some cleaner. The injectors are actually pretty clean, which is good. So we'll just run some cleaner to clean the back side of the valves and the port out. Maybe a little of that injector valve cleaner stuff. Hopefully that'll help dry it out. And probably just with the car running and not sucking all that oil in, the alcohol and the fuel will kind of do a little bit of a good job cleaning that. And this is what I wanted to point out to you guys. If you look in here, you can see that little orange check valve. It's probably pretty difficult to see, just because the way the camera's trying to focus. There we go. I guess that's a pretty decent view of it. But anyway, that's between the two runners for the intake. So that directly kind of connects in between the valve cover venting the crankcase. And I'll bring you over to the one we just pulled out, the original. You can see in here, it's totally gone. So it's literally just a direct connection from here to the PCV. So essentially that vacuum that's being created on that line from the intake is just basically directly right to the crankcase of the engine, because there's no check there. Alright, looks like we're all set. Everything seems to be running pretty smooth. And again, we'll just have to do some cleaning of that accessory side and recheck for leaks. Hopefully that crank seal isn't going to end up being bad, but more than likely, if it pulled itself in due to the excessive vacuum in the crankcase, then it's probably not going to just fix itself. I did bring the car outside just there. Got some degreaser and sprayed it all out with a hose and everything, so hopefully that's clean and dry now. And then we'll just drive it a little bit and see if that oil leak comes back, and then also hope this PCV issue should be completely resolved now that we've got both the new intake manifold and the valve cover gasket together as an assembly. And it's always good to have that little aha moment, like when we took that factory intake manifold off and we looked up into that kind of runner area and found that inline check valve is missing there, and on the new one you could clearly see that little orange check valve laying inside there with the little retainer on it. So that makes me feel a little bit better that we kind of found what was causing the diaphragm to fail on the valve cover assembly, and that makes me feel like we did finally work our way back to the root cause of what the problem was that started this whole thing, and that was more than likely the check valve failing in the intake manifold, and then that caused the diaphragm to rupture because of the extreme crankcase vacuum on the valve cover. So working our way back, we kind of found that root cause, and then we addressed all the problems subsequent with that root cause and got everything fixed now. So the last thing that may be remaining is some oil leaks we're gonna have to address. So thanks for watching, and we will see you guys on the next one.